And 1, 2, 3. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Life Point Table Talk podcast. My name is Jason. I'm here with my brother Tyler.
Hello.
And today we are continuing with our Bible reading reflection. I hope you all have been tuning in and reading along. And we've really been enjoying doing this, so keep following along. And today we have got quite a bit. We've got Numbers 16 through 33 and Mark 6:33 through 10:31. Yeah.
Very precise.
Yes, I'm not sure who chose these breaks, but we're going to go with it. We're rolling with it. And today I'd like to start in the New Testament, because we usually start off in the Old Testament reading and it goes forever.
Yes.
And then unfortunately the New Testament
Gets a little scammed.
we're a little tired out by then. So we'll start there. So we're starting at Mark 6:33, which was right where we stopped last time. And Jesus and the disciples were trying to get away to rest, and it didn't work out. A large crowd follows them, and I love this part because it says Jesus was moved with compassion.
Yeah, me too.
When he looks at them, they're like lost sheep chasing him.
Yep.
Which is totally accurate.
Yeah.
And this leads into one of these amazing miracles here. It's too late for him to eat, and they only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he feeds 5,000.
Yeah.
And 12 baskets left over. I wish I knew what that looked like.
I know, right?
Do you think he just kept breaking bread like a
I
gazillion
don't
times?
know.
Or
I
did it
don't
just
know.
show up in front of people? Or
Yeah, and it's like I love too that the numbers are very specific
Yeah.
and they have very detailed, in-depth meaning too.
Hmm.
Even down to I think where it says, yeah, the disciples say, "Shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread?"
Right.
Which is 8 months of wages.
Wow.
Like, that's how many people are here, Lord.
Yeah.
You want us to feed them? We got to go spend 8 months of wages. But he has them sit down in hundreds and fifties, which is really fascinating too, because that was that time that was a common practice for military procedures. You'd put your military groups in hundreds and fifties,
Uh-huh.
and I thought this is pretty cool because it's like he's announcing this new kingdom, and it's like this kingdom invasion's coming, but it's going to look like nothing what people thought.
Wow. That's
So I
awesome.
thought that was pretty cool. And then the last thing is the 12 baskets.
Yeah.
I don't think that's accidental at all. I think that represents Israel.
Yeah. 12
And so
tribes.
this is to the Jews, and then just in a couple of chapters, we're going to have a different feeding that's specific to the Gentiles.
Right. Right.
So it's like
Oh,
his
that's really cool.
all-encompassing ministry.
Yeah. So after that, Jesus goes up to a mountain to pray, and the disciples go out at sea, and they're struggling to get across because the wind's going against them, something like that. And this really caught me as funny because I forget what maybe all the translations say this, but it says Jesus made it look like he was just going to walk by.
Yeah.
like was he
Just
playing a joke
super
on him
casual.
or something? Yeah, he acted like he was just walking by on the water. And obviously it freaked them out. They thought it was a ghost, and it was Jesus. And he comes on the ship there, and the winds die down. And then they get to the other side, and again they just talking here how the entire area, that whole town and region, when he shows up, it's like Beatlemania, pretty much. I mean, they're crowding, and
They want to see this guy.
they want to even just to touch him, you know.
Yeah, and I love that it says that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And then immediately you just think back, I think it was just a chapter or two with the woman in the issue of blood.
Right.
That's what she did.
It must have got around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like words traveling about this guy.
And there, I was thinking too, like it had to be intense. Like the disciples were probably almost like bodyguards, you know,
Well,
because they would be crushing
I
him
love you
if
said that
everybody's-
because we're going to see in a couple of chapters, it explains a little bit of their behavior.
yeah,
When they look like they're not very welcoming
right,
and kind of jerks.
yeah,
I think it informs to that. They're like, I mean, they're just constantly throngs of people like
and
surrounding
you
them.
see that in some of these stars or whatever, it becomes dangerous
Yeah,
because people
you
are
have
just
to have the
they-
entourage.
they go crazy, you know. And he was like rock star's a cheap word for it, but he was a phenomenon, I
Yeah.
guess you could say. So that ends 6. We get into 7 here, and he's going back and forth with the Pharisees about the disciples eating when they're unclean, I believe it is,
Yeah,
which we've been reading about quite a bit. The rules that the Israel had for being clean, and
yeah, I've seen that in our Old Testament readings.
yeah, it was really serious, and but Jesus kind of flips it on them,
Mm-hmm.
and he's talking about how they honor the Lord with their lips but not their hearts, and he brings up a really intense thing about how it says you should put to death kids who dishonor their parents.
Yeah,
He said you're not doing that.
yeah.
Why
Well, he
is he
says
put-
too, you're finding loopholes.
Yeah,
He says you're finding loopholes and not take care of your mom and dad, which is part of the commandments too.
right.
So saying that, well, that money is set aside for God,
Yeah,
for an offering. But with Jesus, it's what's cool is he's always gets to the heart of the matter.
right.
It's a hard issue.
Yeah. And it gets into some really deep stuff here. He starts talking about nothing outside going in a man defiles him,
Mm-hmm.
but what comes out of the heart, evil comes out of the human heart, which is so true. I mean, I don't know when we will learn this. How many times we look at things and objects and places that are evil, it's always the humans in the situation who are the problem.
Yeah.
It's not the things.
Well,
It's the people.
Yeah, and it really stood out to me too what he said. He calls it your tradition, traditions of men.
Yeah.
It's stuff that they've kind of extrapolated from the original ideal will of God and the original commandments that they've just over time have turned into their traditions.
Yeah.
And he's saying, you're missing the mark here. It's not what that was about this whole time.
Yeah.
It's really about this.
Yeah. And then we get to the Syrophoenician woman, and she's asking Jesus to heal her possessed daughter. And Jesus says, Israel first. And he says, it's not right to throw the children's bread to dogs. And she replies, don't dogs get the crumbs? And this is a really intense exchange. It's, he's calling this people group dogs.
Yeah.
I've heard different ways of this
Yeah,
explained.
it's not a nice connotation.
I don't think there's any nice way to put it necessarily. The one that made sense to me was that he was talking about some of the customs that her people group were, her culture and stuff were part of, and the rituals to other gods and things, and
Yeah.
it was some pretty nasty stuff they were involved in, child sacrifice and all that kind of stuff. So I think he meant it. I don't think it was. I could be wrong. You know what I mean? It could be a play on words there, where it wasn't as harsh or something.
Yeah, and some people think that it was more like a term for like a cute house pet, like house dog, because later it talks about the dog under the table eating the scraps.
True.
But that connotation would not be lost on anyone standing there when he would said dog.
Well, even still, the dog.
Yeah.
That's not very nice.
And really, it's about her faith.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah. But what's fascinating is that's her answer. The dogs get the crumbs.
Yeah, that's her faith in action right there.
And it says Jesus is moved by her humility and faith.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, her faith sort of surpassed and gave her access to this blessing.
Yeah,
which
it wasn't originally for her people.
It wasn't for her yet. He hadn't died yet. She wasn't part of the covenant, and yet her faith gave her access to it.
Yeah,
amazing. And after that, they bring a deaf man to Jesus. Deaf man, and he can't speak. I think this is the first time Jesus spits in his finger and puts it in his ear. Is that right? And he's healed.
After spitting, yeah, he touched his tongue with the saliva.
Yeah.
And I love this too. This is either the first or second in a kind of a string of moments where it says that Jesus sighed.
Yeah.
A deep sigh. And that really struck me, like just how human he was, almost like, man.
The fact that they put it in there.
Yeah. Like
he was moved by something.
We just read that he was moved with compassion or these hungry crowds. And I think it was the same thing here. Like he was just looking at this brokenness that wasn't ever supposed to be. Never God's design to happen.
Right.
And it bums him out. It breaks his heart. And, and it could be coupled too with a lot of the unbelief.
Frustration side.
And frustration side too of what he's seen and what he's going to see, ahead. But yeah, like a deep sigh. He said to him, Ephphatha. I don't know. It's be opened, it says. Thank goodness for the translation, right? Be opened.
Yeah.
It's amazing, but he's very demonstrative. And he's going to be again in a couple of chapters with another healing episode.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, I gotta, since I was a little kid, this is always, why the spit? What's going on there? Some people could just touch his garment and get healed, and for some reason he's going through this other process.
Yeah, like I said, it was very demonstrative. Almost it was maybe for the people that were watching from afar, like almost like a type of sign language.
Interesting.
Like, describing to those that weren't near what was happening.
Yeah. Then we get to chapter 8. We got another large crowd, and this is amazing. They had been with him for 3 days.
Yeah.
What in the world? How did that work?
One of those, what are those popular festivals like Bonnaroo? Or,
they were having a Bonnaroo.
Yeah.
They had to be. They're camping out and stuff or something. Again, he has compassion on them.
Mm-hmm.
And this time he feeds 4,000 with 7 loaves and a few fishes.
Yep.
And this is what you're referencing, right?
Yeah, and then it says, this time around, it says that they picked up 7 baskets of leftovers. So the first feeding was implied towards the Jewish people, the 12 baskets, like the 12 tribes of Israel. And 7 throughout the Bible is always the number of perfection and completion. So this is the going out to it's the original Genesis 12 covenant promise.
Wow. Yeah.
That all the families in the earth will be blessed through these people. And so that 7 is like a sign of completion. So now it's interesting too that is sandwiched between the Syrophoenician gal, which also concerned bread. There's like this bread motif going on.
Yeah.
And of course we know from John's gospel and other things that he's the bread of life. And there's just so much imagery and power in that.
Yeah.
And so he's coming to everyone with this gospel message and this salvation.
Yeah, it's amazing just sometimes the way these cross references are, they're almost too on for me. Like, wait a second, are they just taking this old stuff and putting it in here in a clever way? I kind of sometimes feel like that. I'm not saying it is, but there's so many of them, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
you know. Then we get into the Pharisees. They're demanding a sign. This is probably not a good sigh. He sighs deeply.
Yeah,
And he
this
says,
is another emotion. This is like exasperation.
Yeah, yeah. And they're not going to be given a sign.
Yeah.
And he warns his disciples of the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because we're reading simultaneously these Numbers in Leviticus where people saw plenty of signs, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't always change the way they acted, right?
Yeah.
And we come to another blind man.
Yeah, before that, though, I love it. He says to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they more or less said, is he talking about us not having any bread here?
Right. Yeah.
And Mark has like a motif throughout his whole gospel.
Yeah.
He doesn't really paint the disciples in a super positive light.
Yeah.
Kind of numbskulls.
Right.
Like
right.
slow to get it.
Yeah, he's kind of frustrated too. I
Yeah.
have the notes, but it's like, what? How are you not getting this?
Yeah, and what Jesus says to them too. He quotes from the Old Testament, having eyes and do not see, and having ears do not hear.
Right.
And then immediately following is him healing a blind man. So it's like he's like contrasting their blindness and to what he's about to do with this man and this healing. And this is one of my favorites. I call it the Jesus optometrist.
Yeah, this
healing.
is another. He's going with the spit again. Is he spit in his eye? Is he spitting in his eye here?
No.
On the ground, or
it says, take the blind man by the hand after spitting on his. Oh yeah, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up. I love this. And he looked up, and he said, "I see men, but I see them like trees walking around." Then again, he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored.
It's amazing.
And that's why I said the Jesus optometrist, because I got terrible eyesight. So I get every couple of years I get new glasses.
What
And
do
it made
you
me think of one or two. One or two. C or D. C or D, you know? It's just amazing.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where it's just people are different, I guess. Their experience with Jesus are different, you know. He's still healed, but the process is different, you know.
Right. And also there's this kind of current theme too of people's faith.
Yeah.
Associated with their healing, and maybe there's stuff missing that we weren't on the scene. Maybe that has something to do with his faith and his response to what Jesus was doing.
Yeah, I think like you're saying, like there's not a lot in here, like it's deliberate what Mark's telling us, you know, even the numbers and things. Like he takes the guy out of town. It says like there's something there going on. Like it was a personal, you know,
it meant something.
Yeah. Then we get to this amazing passage here where he's asking Peter, "Who do you say I am?" And he says John the Baptist, Elisha, or the other prophets, which is interesting because that kind of shows you they were already thinking in these archetype.
Yep, they were looking.
Like obviously he's not John the Baptist. There was a John the Baptist. There was an Elisha. There's like he's like that.
Yeah.
You know, he's like this guy. And then of course he says, "Who do you say I am?" Which is probably the most important question in the scriptures.
Yeah, any of us can answer.
And he says, "You are the Christ." And this is another theme. The whole time Jesus is telling them not to tell anyone.
Yeah.
Strictly tells them not to tell anyone.
Including people he heals and delivers.
Yeah.
They call it the Mark's messianic secret.
It's great. It's very why do you think that was?
I think for sure it was because at this time, like you were saying, that we're looking for Elijah. Is he John the Baptist? Is he one of the prophets? They were very much looking for this Messiah. Like it was in their consciousness, especially in the couple hundred years leading up to that, this post-exilic Israel existence. But they were looking for a Messiah that was going to cut heads off and take down Rome,
like David,
and kill everybody and deliver them and rule the world. And Jesus came to do it a very different way. And he knew that if he gave them enough encouragement that he was that kind of Messiah, the whole thing would just implode.
Yeah.
And I think that was why he was so secretive. Like, I'm not going to let you do that and turn this into this, because I have this mission that leads to the cross.
Well, it's fascinating because right after that, he explains very clearly to the disciples.
Peter was doing so good.
He's going to suffer.
He was doing so good for 2 seconds.
Suffer and die and be. I mean, it's so hard because we're seeing this in hindsight to understand. I obviously we can't say we do any better, but it seems like he's being very clear with these guys what's going to happen and how it's going to go down, and they're just not accepting it, not getting it.
I think that's ties into what we just talked about. They were so expecting this other type of Messiah King, deliverer, redeemer.
It didn't even make sense.
It didn't make sense. They're like, it just glanced off of them, which leads perfectly into Peter's response.
Yeah.
It can't be so.
Right. Yeah.
You know, he says, no way.
In the best ever, get behind me, Satan, to Peter. And I use that phrase all the time.
To the kids?
To my mother-in-law when she offers me cookies or something.
Yeah.
Get behind me, Carol.
Yeah. What's amazing, one paragraph earlier, Peter got it right.
Yeah.
He said, you are the Christ. You are the anointed one. You are the Messiah. And now, 3 seconds later, he's getting it wrong.
And then that chapter ends with Jesus bringing, the part of the gospel that is a little harder. So some folks don't like this part.
The cost of discipleship.
Yeah, if you want to follow Christ, you must deny yourself and pick up your cross. You must lose your life to save it. What can you exchange for your soul? If you're ashamed of me, I will be ashamed of you. I mean, it's pretty intense language there.
Very much so.
Yeah, that those passages, that whole last passage with Peter right to the end there that sticks with me.
Yeah,
quite deeply.
And what's amazing is he just tells them about what has to happen concerning his death.
Yeah,
and the cross, and then as we get into 9 and the transfiguration, what's so cool is immediately, at least for the inner core of the 30 that go with him, you see the other side of the cross too. It's like this glimpse of his resurrection glory, like what's to come after.
Yeah, it was really cool. So we're in 9 now, and so Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to a high mountain, and he's transfigured in front of them. And I can't, I couldn't help but see how directly this is related to what we've been reading.
Dude.
It's like almost the same thing. A cloud shows up.
Listen.
He's shining.
Listen to this.
And look at this. I always thought Peter was just crazy, okay? I always thought he was making fun of him. But the one I was reading, it says he wanted to make 3 tabernacles.
Yeah, like their
makes
festival.
Total sense. Like he forgot like a holy thing.
Yeah.
He was making a holy area for them.
He was still getting it wrong, but his heart was okay.
Yeah, but it made like when the translation I was reading said tabernacles and not tents. Like that made so much more
like
sense.
their feast of tabernacles, their
like,
festival. Yeah, I love it though. I love the way it's worded though. It's like, Lord, it's good to be here. Because later on, actually Mark, he does a lot. Tim Mackey from the Bible Project, he talks about how he'll put stuff in parentheses or infer things that are kind of like, dear reader. Dear reader, he said this because he did not know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
He was missing that. But in Exodus 24, after 6 days, Moses is summoned to the mountaintop to get the revelation from God, which is amazing because it starts off right here, verse 2, 6 days later, Jesus took with him. So here we are back on top of a mountain with this revelation from God.
Yeah.
And we're going to see a similarity too as he comes down the mountain.
Yeah. And so God's voice says, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." I can't help but hear James Earl Jones in my head there.
I'm your father.
Yeah.
Nice. This is my boy.
Again, he tells them, let's see.
Yeah, as they were coming down the mountain,
Oh,
he
yeah,
gave them orders not to relate to anyone what they had
until
seen.
he rises from the dead.
Yeah.
And that they
Which is
don't,
pretty direct.
Well, I think it talks about it. They're like, "What's he talking about?"
They didn't
Rise
understand
from the
until
dead.
later.
Yeah.
And what's cool is when they get down to the bottom of the mountain, just like when Moses got down the bottom mountain, there's this failure.
Yeah.
He's immediately confronted with this failure of faith and this boy who they couldn't deliver.
Yeah.
And he shows his frustration just like Moses showed his frustration when he got down and saw the golden calf. It's really cool.
Wow.
The parallels are so fascinating.
Yeah. And I love it. The father says, "If you can help him," and Jesus,
Can I help him?
It feels like he's indignant a little bit. If you can,
Yeah. What do you mean?
like, of course I can.
That's what I mean. It's like it's just showing like kind of some real human skin and emotion there.
And he says, "All is possible for those who believe." In the best, one of my favorites, he says, "Help, I believe, but help my unbelief."
Yeah, what a great prayer.
Yeah.
What a great prayer.
Yeah. And then he casts it out in just a interesting thing. He calls it a mute, deaf spirit,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
And I'm fascinated too with how much illness is related to the demonic. That's really, really fascinating to me as well. And it says that it came out and the boy became like a corpse.
Yeah.
And they said he is dead, but Jesus took him by the hand and raised him. And that can't be accidental either. He just was on top of this mountain in this preview of resurrection glory.
Right.
After talking about his journey to the cross he's got to endure. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And Jesus keeps talking again about being betrayed and killed. The disciples are talking about being first or the greatest. Again, he gives this sort of upside down world where the first will be last. And this cool part where he welcomes the children to him. And they're talking also about here.
Was that a 9 or a 10?
There's two. There's two parts with the
two children. Oh
two children's. At the end there, they're somebody else is casting out demons or healing people in the name of Jesus, and the disciples told him to stop. Jesus says, if he's not against us, he's for us. And it's just so dense with rich stuff here. He's talking about if you cause somebody to sin, tie a rock on your neck,
giant
in the water.
Millstone.
And he also gives the famous, what causes you to sin, cut it off.
Yeah.
Cut your hand off, poke your eye out.
With a reference to hell.
Yeah.
Where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's intense.
Very intense. Better to go into heaven without an arm.
Maimed. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Then go into hell whole.
It's true. We know it's true. You know what I mean?
Instinctively, there's something there.
Yeah, there's things in life that'll cost you in the short run. You got to let go of that. It's worth it in the long run.
Yeah.
He's just using this incredibly effective language about it, and it's powerful.
It really is.
Then we get into 10. They're asking about divorce, and this is really interesting.
Yes, I agree.
Moses allowed it, says because they had hard hearts, and Jesus references Genesis. He goes even back further than Moses.
All the way to Adam and Eve.
Yeah. And it's just it's interesting. uh, Moses was allowed to allow it,
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and I got to think
was
about
he meeting them where they were at kind of deal?
you and I love this book by a guy named Greg Boyd called The Crucifixion of the Warrior God. And part of his whole motif in that book is how in different stages of world history, God kind of stooped to the level to meet people where they were at so that he could reveal himself to him until he could eventually get to Jesus. And it was kind of in these stages. And it feels like that's kind of what Jesus is saying. He's like, look, Moses adapted to your hard-heartedness and your stubbornness, but actually the real ideal from our Heavenly Father is Adam and Eve.
Right.
They were one flesh.
Yeah.
Which is, if I want to sleep on the couch, I just have to use the phrase one flesh in my household. My wife hates it.
Not a fan.
Not a fan. For whatever reason. But yeah, he's like, that's not God's ideal will. And it's interesting too, because it really shows that Jesus means what he says about what God really intends and really wants for his creation and for his created.
Yeah. And this is then it goes into the next part here where it is, he says, bring the children to me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this intense thing that then goes into this really nice thing with the kids. And at the end, I love it. He hugs them and blesses them.
Yeah.
I always have to bring this up, but if the kids were attracted to Jesus and really liked him, he must have had a certain type of personality that was attractive to them. He couldn't have been super dour and serious and angry all the time. There was something about him that was attractive.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about earlier, where the disciples were... They were growing impatient all the time because of the throngs and the crowds that were pressing in on them. And then when the children came, it says the disciples rebuked them.
Right.
Like, no. And I read this commentary. It said that in that culture, the children in these ancient cultures were to be seen and not heard. And it made me think of the show Arrested Development. The Milford man, Buster. He was neither seen nor heard. You'd have to see the show to know what we're talking about.
The best.
But like you said, there was just something about Jesus. It was attractive.
Yeah.
It was joyful, and he wasn't about to deny that.
Right.
But Mark's just constantly kind of painting these guys in this negative light.
Getting it wrong.
But they're getting it wrong, and they are. But at the same time, like you said earlier, you could just imagine they're almost serving as like these bodyguard dudes.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you've got all these people constantly pressing in on him, and it's an intense scene.
And it ends. We'll end here on 10 with the story of the rich man comes to Jesus, asks him what he must do to be saved, and interestingly, Jesus lists the commands.
Yeah.
And the guy keeps going. Says he did them all.
Yeah, and Jesus is like, cool. That's awesome.
I love it because it says Jesus feels love toward him.
Yeah, he loved him.
Yeah, it was like, and then he tells him to sell everything and follow him.
Yeah,
like I think he meant it. Like it says he loved him. Like, come with us, man. Like
you're a good candidate.
Yeah, you're on the right track. Come with us.
Good job.
Yeah, and
he also knew the button to press.
Yeah.
He knew his thing, which I think is important to see in this episode, because I think this passage has been twisted many, many times over, where you can't have anything nice. You can't have wealth.
Yeah.
You can't have that sort of thing, because Jesus calls everyone to be poor and not have that sort of thing. He just talked to this guy about that.
Yeah, and he does go into some intense language there about it's hard for the rich to be saved.
Mm-hmm.
But it ends with God all things are possible.
Totally. And it makes me think of the parable that we talked about last week of the sower and the seed. And so this guy is that type of soil where the tares come up, the worries, the cares, the wealth, the stuff of the world, and it chokes out the word of God.
Right.
Yeah.
And it ends really cool. We'll end here. The disciples are talking about what they left behind to follow Jesus, and he's saying, If you left something behind, or a person or a thing, it'll be given back to you even more.
Yeah.
And this incredible promise for now in our lives, and for the future to come as well.
Yeah.
It's awesome promise there. Whatever we let go of, we will receive even more through Christ. It's amazing.
Yep. Awesome.
And okay, we'll stop there. We did a pretty good one here on the New Testament reading, and we will come back with another part 2 with our Old Testament reading. Stay tuned and come back and check out part 2.
Awesome.
See you later.